as we are now into day 9 of the MLSisback tournament, and that we play roughly about 20 matches into this tournament, and that most teams are now into match day number 2 of the group stage of this tournament, I thought this would be a good time for me to kind of share a little bit of my reflection and kind of some things that I've noticed throughout this tournament. And that the first thing I want to talk about is the setup of the stadium and the camera angle, and that I kind of still have a mixed feeling about it. Now, I kind of mentioned it back on opening night where I talk about the camera angle and the setup of the stadium, but that was kind of like my first reaction in terms of that. Well, now that we play roughly about 20 games and I've been seeing that kind of setup for at least 10 times so far, I still kind of have a little bit of a mixed feeling about it. Like, I have no problem in terms of them putting like a CGI way with those advertisement on the other side of the wall, and that I have no problem with the virtual screen. And in fact, the virtual screen is something that I really like, seeing those fans kind of like in the Zoom call and kind of very hyped up when they're watching the game. But what I do have problem in terms of the setup is the Adidas logo. And I know the Adidas logo, as the tournament goes on, it seemed like it's getting smaller and smaller by each day, but the fact that it is still there is kind of just a little bit of a nuance. And then MLS actually looked like they were going to be in trouble with the IFAB, because the IFAB basically said that you cannot have any kind of sponsorship or any kind of advertisement on the play of pitch. And I guess the reason why MLS didn't get in trouble and kind of got a free pass from the IFAB is because that logo isn't actually on the pitch and it's just kind of like a CGI kind of thing. And I think the law of the game said nothing about how if you just put like a CGI kind of sponsored logo or an advertisement, that nothing says that that of course is illegal. And that's why MLS is kind of bending the rules a little bit, but I really don't like the fact that they do it, and also the fact that the logo is just there on in the center circle. Now, in terms of the camera angle, I also have mixed feeling about it. Like, again, at times I do like the camera angle being high up, and that, you know, I always like to kind of dissect the game and kind of look at the tactical standpoint of the game. So with the camera angle being so high up, I can definitely see the tactics of how each team is set up and how each player, where they actually position throughout the game, and see if players are actually out of position. And at times I do like how they kind of had an aerial view of a counter attack, and that it looks very beautiful with the way that they have an aerial view of a counter attack that just put into display. So that's something I like about the camera angle. The thing that I don't like about the camera angle is that sometimes it does obstruct part of the action, especially whenever there is some action near the sideline. That's when the camera angle doesn't really capture it very well, and it's kind of obstructed a little bit. So that's why I kind of have some mixed feeling about the camera angle, and that I know there are other people that are not a big fan of the camera angle because of how it feels like the angle is way too high and it should be a little bit lower than it needs to be. Now, the other thing that I also notice is the fake crowd noise, and this is kind of a little bit unpopular opinion, but I am not really a big fan of the fake crowd noise. I mean, I guess listening to the fake crowd noise at first on the Fox feed and the FS1 feed, I kind of do like it in some ways where it's not too noisy, and it doesn't sound like it's just some generic fake crowd noise, and that it kind of blends in pretty well with the game that is actually happening. But what I don't like about the fake crowd noise is the Twitter and to the end kind of feed where they just blast the fake crowd noise and you can barely even hear the commentator whatsoever, which again, as I will mention, and should I just mention right now with the Twitter stream as awful as ever, I don't mind the fact that they blasted over the Twitter commentator, because those commentators are awful in the first place. But at the same time, it kind of ruins the general atmosphere of the game, and that, you know, it feels kind of like a little bit of an earful whenever I hear those fake crowd noise, and that hence that is also one of the biggest reasons why I haven't really watched the Twitter stream throughout this tournament. The other reason why I haven't watched the Twitter stream is that there have been some technical difficulty. And I remember, as I said back in the first time when they did the Twitter stream, they didn't actually start the stream 2 minutes into the game. And then in the last 2 minutes of the game, it decided to just switch off and call it a night. And for those people that actually watched the Twitter stream back in that first game between the Impact and the Revs, they would have missed an incredible save that Matt Turner had made literally in the last minute of the game. And if that goal actually went in, boy oh boy, Revs fans are going to be very pissed off the fact that they weren't able to see that. Or Impact fan will also be very upset that they weren't able to see that. And as a neutral in perspective, we miss a crucial part of the game and a crucial point of the game that really was the reason why the result would have been at a 1-1 draw between the Impact and the Revs. So at that point, from then on, I basically did not watch a Twitter stream, and I just basically just go online and look for some illegal stream for TSN, and that I really like some of the coverage that TSN has been doing, where they don't have any fake crowd noise whatsoever. Their commentator is actually very decent, and it feels like it's the best feed out of all of the ones so far compared to the other broadcasts that has covered this tournament so far. The other thing I of course noticed is the Black Lives Matter message. It has been very powerful in this tournament, and I understand. Look, I know there's traditional sports fans are not liking the way that this Black Lives Matter message has been very powerful in this tournament, or in general, they don't like the fact that a lot of these athletes are using this as a platform to talk about their social justice. I mean, traditional sports fan will always say that, athletes, they are literally there to pay to play the game. They're not there to actually talk about social justice and stuff like that. Well, it was true in the past, but I feel like as we have seen in these past couple of years, the sports world has really changed, and that we have seen more and more now that athletes have really took a stance in terms of the social issue that it's been going on throughout. And obviously, we know right now the Black Lives Matter is one of the biggest social issue that is going on right now. And, the league have also kind of took a stance, and that they encourage players to, of course, use this as a platform, which is something I feel like these traditional sports fans need to realize, that, if the leagues decided to encourage these players to do it and allow these players to use this platform as a way to share their thoughts of the social issue that is going on, it's perfectly fine. And that, again, we're moving into a world where this is going to be the way it is, and if you don't like it, then too bad. This is going to be the way with it, and that if you really don't like it, then maybe you shouldn't watch sports anymore, and that you should basically just watch old sports kind of clip, and that's the only thing that you are going to have to adapt to. But yeah, I really like the Black Lives Matter message so far. It's been very powerful in this tournament. Besides the fact that each of the team take a knee right before the first half whistle has been blown. We also have seen other players, manager, and even teams have gone even an extra length by putting some special kind of dedication to the Black Lives Matter movement that is going on. So yeah, I really like what the league has been doing, and in terms of how the message has been shared throughout this tournament. Now moving on in terms of talk about games that is taking place in this tournament and some of my reflection. Well, one of the things that I've always noticed is that players look like they drench in water after 10 minutes, and this is kind of expected when you're playing in like 100% humidity in like 90-degree heat in Orlando. You are going to be drenched in sweat after just 10 minutes. A lot of players have been cramping near the end of the game, which again, not a big surprise, because it is very hard to breathe in that humidity and be expected to run full competitive fitness throughout the 90 minutes without potentially getting a cramp at the end of the game. And let's also not forget that, most of these players, they didn't have any competitive game action heading into this tournament, and there wasn't even like a pre-season as we head into this tournament for every single team in MLS. So obviously you are going to expect players to get cramp, and that their fitness level is definitely nowhere near where it usually be in a competitive ways. I also thought that the games are getting excited by every single day, and I know there were a lot of people that was complaining the fact that during the first couple of games the game were very boring and was very slow paced. Well, duh. Obviously, it's gonna be slow paced. I mean, these players, as I said, they haven't played in over 4 months, and they don't have any preseason game to kind of get up to match fitness. That's why games are gonna be very slow paced, and things are going to be very dire at time. But I thought as we get through the tournament, I feel like the games have gotten a lot more excited, and a lot of that might has to do with the fact that players are now starting to get back to match fitness, and that we seemed like these games are actually returning to what a lot of MLS game does really look like. And we also have seen some games that has been even above the entertainment of what an MLS game looks like, with some of those crazy comebacks and those goal fests that we have seen in the past couple of days. Speaking of comebacks, and I'm actually just gonna skip this and move into this point that I have with this tournament, is that we have seen some crazy comebacks in this tournament. Like, I think the first crazy comeback we saw in this tournament was that Minnesota versus Sporting KC game, where the Loons, of course, came back and scored 2 goals in stoppage time to beat SKC. Albeit, yes, the Loons were up a man for the last 15 minutes, but it is still very rare. You see a team be down 1-0 heading into stoppage time, and they basically completely turn it around in stoppage time and won 2-1, and that both of those goals came in stoppage time. We also saw that improbable comeback between TFC and DC United, where DC United was down a man throughout the entire second half, and yet somehow in some way they were able to score two goals in the final 9 minutes of the game to draw 2-2 against Toronto. We also saw the comeback that LAFC had against the Dynamo, where they were down 3-1 in the game, pull it back to 3-3, and was kind of a little bit unfortunate they weren't able to complete the comeback. And then obviously the mother of all comebacks happened last night between the San Jose Earthquakes versus the Vancouver Whitecaps, where that game, yeah, the Quakes, they were down 3-1 with 18 minutes to go. A lot of the time, you would think the Whitecaps should be able to seal all 3 points and that the Quakes are not going to come back from this. And believe it or not, that game wasn't part of the trend, and that somehow in some way the Quakes were able to score 3 goals in the last 18 minutes, including an incredible stoppage time winner from Salinas to basically come from behind and win 4-3 in the game. And that just kind of capped off in terms of some of the crazy comebacks that we have seen so far in this tournament, and that some of these comebacks you definitely didn't see it coming, but it still happened in a way. And that is kind of the reason why I really love this game, and I really love the league of seeing these crazy comebacks that nobody thought that it was going to be possible. Now, moving back to the last point that I kind of skipped, is that I also seen a lot of favorites in this tournament that are struggling so far, and that I believe last year in terms of all the semifinals from conference play last year, I think all those teams so far, they have only got a total of 3 points so far in this tournament. If you want to go back to the top 4 of last year in terms of the Supporter Shield standings, all 4 of those teams have only got 2 points so far into the tournament. And, again, a lot of that probably might have to do with the fact that some of these teams that were thought to be favorites heading in this tournament lost a couple of key players heading into this tournament. Well, not just a couple of key players, but probably the most important players that they lost in this tournament, and just have significantly make them much weaker into this one. So it's not surprised the fact that a lot of favorites are struggling, but at the same time, because of the fact that a lot of favorites has been struggling, I can't wait until we get into the knockout stage, where there's going to be some teams that you would probably wrote them off when this tournament was announced, and yet they're in the knockout stage, and that I won't be surprised the champion of this tournament is probably a team that you didn't think was a team that could have possibly lift the trophy as the team that won the MLSisback tournament. We also saw a record broken with the Quakes had a record 23 corners. Like, throughout this tournament, I didn't think we were going to see an MLS record being broken, and it happened last night with the Quakes having a record amount of corners with 23. And I actually didn't find this out until when I finished doing that review, and that it's kind of also unsurprised the fact that there was a record broken in that game, because again, that was just a crazy game that had happened, probably the craziest game we have saw so far in this tournament. And I did say that game looked very similar to the one where the Quakes play against the Whitecaps back in August last year. It was a game where the Quakes completely dominated, and that the only difference between that game to the one back in August is that in the game against the Whitecaps back in August, we didn't give those two goals to the Whitecaps like we did in last night game, and that because of the fact that we gift them those 2 goals, that's why the game was more stressful and just more kind of crazy than it definitely should have been in terms of the Quakes fans' perspective. We have not had a penalty kick conversion, and I think this is probably one of the most surprising stats so far in this tournament. We saw 2 penalties in this tournament so far, and we also saw 2 penalties that has been overruled by VAR, including one that actually happened this morning in the game between Atlanta and FC Cincinnati. But yeah, we play about 20 games and we have yet to see a penalty kick conversion, and that both penalties that has happened in the game, both of them were saved by the keeper. So, we don't know whether or not if we're going to eventually get one, but I'm assuming eventually we are going to see a penalty and that it is going to be converted through this tournament. VAR and refereeing has been questionable in this tournament, which I will also should have probably said that VAR and refereeing is kind of in mid-season form, because that refereeing and the usage of VAR in this tournament is going to be questionable, because that's always been the way it is. And I know fans have been frustrated with the way that it's been like this, but again, it's unfortunate the fact that MLS is dealing with this issue, and that unless a pro doesn't really sort out all these problems that we've seen with the usage of VAR and some of the questionable calls that has been happening throughout this game, we're going to continue to see this. And that I'm not saying that we should pro should just completely eliminate all those controversial calls, because controversial call is part of soccer, but still, I feel like there's definitely more questionable call than we definitely want to see, and that is kind of the reason why I've been always say that pro needs to look at this, and they need to try to find a way to limit the amount of questionable calls that we have seen in this game and the controversy that we had to deal with on a nightly basis. But moving away from kind of the stats and kind of talk about the games throughout this tournament and my reflection to it, to kind of talk about one of the biggest thing that I want to kind of do a reflection on, and that of course is the whole COVID-19 situation. Now, I know for the past couple of days, a lot of people are still saying that this tournament should be canceled, and that this tournament eventually it's going to get to a point where we're going to eventually have a situation where MLS have no choice but to cancel that tournament. Well, unless we're getting to a point where there might be kind of an outbreak happening in the bubble, that is not going to happen. And so far, right now, I haven't seen any situation or any news that talk about there was a potential outbreak that has happened in the bubble itself. There's only been one game that has been postponed because of COVID-19, and that was the DC United versus TFC game. But in that game alone, and in terms of just the testing so far, there still is a lot of questionable in terms of the testing and how it's actually conducted, and how those testing data, is it actually telling the truth and giving the right data. Because there's been not only the fact that the other good news about why this tournament probably is not going to be canceled, because there hasn't been a lot of reports of positive tests, and that I think we only have like 3 positive tests ever since this tournament has, well, actually 5 positive tests if you include what happened in that DC versus TFC game. But not only because of that, but we have heard stories about how some of these tests have some inconclusive data, and that sometimes when a player got tested positive for this virus, it might not actually be the right data, and that player might have actually not tested positive. And the reason why I say this is that we saw in that TFC versus DC United game that got postponed, where there was 2 players, one from each team got tested positive for COVID-19. The very next day, I think they said that those players got negative tests for COVID-19, and therefore the game, of course, was taking place. And that I don't think in any circumstances where a player can get tested positive for COVID-19 and that literally the very next day they would be tested negative in terms of COVID-19. Like, if that is a situation, I kind of have to question in terms of these data and the way that they, of course, tested these players, because one day shouldn't be the enough time where a player can get tested positive for COVID-19 and then one day later they of course get tested negative in terms of COVID-19. And if that is of course the situation, then there's got to be something wrong with the testing data and stuff like that. So I think that is probably the biggest concern right now in terms of what is going on in the bubble, and that it's not really the biggest concern related to whether or not if there's going to be an outbreak. And I hope they, of course, eventually fix that, because I really hope we don't get into a situation where there's going to be a case where a lot of people get tested positive for COVID-19, and then the very next day, they're going to get tested negative because the data that they use in the resort were very inconclusive. But yeah, there you have it. That is pretty much it in terms of my quick reflection of what has happened in this tournament. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this, and also what's your reflection in terms of how this tournament has gone so far. And listen, as I said before, I think this tournament is going to continue, and I do have a big optimistic viewpoint, the fact that this tournament will eventually finish and we are going to actually get into the knockout round. And as long as we don't have any outbreak that has been reported in the bubble, this tournament is going to continue, no matter how many people say that it shouldn't continue because it's unsafe whatsoever. But either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.